What if that broken thing that you're trying to put back together is keeping your life from the beautiful thing that is waiting to be built? Words to consider as we begin this service on change. And now please join me as we ring the Tibetan bowl as a call to service. This is an ancient tradition where the harmonies are believed to bring peace and unity to mind and body and spirit. May this be so for each of us this morning.
I'm going to play a song that the translation is Alan Bread, Peace and More. It's an Argentinian song, and the first phrase is I'm water, beach, sky, home, land, ocean, Atlantic, wind, and America. Yo soy, yo soy, yo soy. Son miedo, cuco, grito, llanto. Más miedo, cuco, grito, llanto, raza. Después llegaron las palabras. Se escaparon las miradas, algo pasó, no existe nada. Vamos, decime, contame todo lo que a vos te está pasando, porque si no, cuando está tu alma sola llora, hay que sacarlo todo afuera. Para que adentro nazcan cosas nuevas, hablar mirándote a los ojos, saca lo que se puede afuera, para que adentro nazcan cosas nuevas. Fui niño, una teta, techo, más miedo, grito, llanto. Después llegaron las palabras, pues se escaparon las miradas. Algo pasó, no existe nada. Vamos, decime, contame todo lo que a vos te está pasando, porque si no, cuando está tu alma sola llora, hay que sacarlo todo afuera como la primavera, para que adentro nazcan cosas nuevas, 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 nuevas.
Thank you, Freddie. That was beautiful. Well, good morning. Good morning to our members and our friends and visitors to the Unitarian Universalists of the Chester River, a church that is relevant in our lives, active in the world, and grounded in love and justice. Wherever you are on your life's path, whoever you love, whatever your faith tradition, however light or heavy your heart is this morning, we welcome you. My name is Annie Lavin. This morning, our longtime friend of UUCR, Reverend Greg Shute, returns to the pulpit, always a treat, continuing the theme of change, which has been in many of our UU churches this past month. Most of us know Greg, he needs no introduction, but if you are new, he was our own consulting minister back in the day, He is Minister Emeritus from the UUs of Central Delaware, and we always look forward to his visits. His sermon topic this morning is Changing My Mind, and we look forward to that. Joining us is our pianist, Michael Casey, and guest musician, Freddie Granillo. Gratitude to the tech team and all those who have participated in our service this morning. Your names are in the order of service. You bring gifts to the service, and we are grateful. We have a couple announcements that are very important. The first one is a joyful one. Potluck returns to UUCR this Friday, November 18th at 6 o'clock, right here. This has been such a welcome tradition that we have enjoyed. We get to know each other, we celebrate, we have a wonderful time. Thank you, Proc, for bringing it back now. Help will be needed for setting up and cleanup. There'll be a sign-up sheet outside on the board. November 20th is orientation to UUCR for those who are interested in joining UUCR, just learning more about us. That would be a good opportunity. Oh, I wanted to mention next Sunday is our annual bread communion service with Reverend Sue. And it's an invitation to bring your kids, your grandkids, your friends, lots of music, some new aspects to the service. It's going to be very special, so you'll join us for that for sure. And last but not least, especially to keep peace in my own household, please check out the pictures that are in the hallway in the kitchen area as you go out. They are pictures with the proposed pathway to the Memorial Garden, and they are there showing you different types of construction, some with brick, some with pavers, some with concrete, with some prices. Check them out and see which ones that you think would be lovely. I want to thank Penny McRae and Terry Goldzier and Jim Lavin for hours of work on this. There will be a meeting on this coming up. It will be announced, and you'll want to know which one is the one that you would be voting for. So check those out. And now, let us begin. Greg will offer some chalice lighting words as I light the chalice, and then we'll have the refrain as we use the words that we usually do in the order of service.
Here we have come into this space, quieter now with our readiness, hushed voices, hoping, trusting for so many things, for connection, for communion, for inspiration, for information, for healing, for wholeness, for words, for music, for celebration, and for consolation. Here we have come into this space, bringing all of who we are. Let us be willing, however we are changed.
And now we'll join together the words in your order of service for the chalice lighting. We light
This chalice as a symbol of the light within all creation. We light this chalice for truth. May the search for truth be with us always. We light this chalice for love. May the love for others be strong in our hearts.
And now we'll have a dual reading between Greg and myself. It's called Change Is, and it's written by Reverend Dr. David Breeden.
It's the only constant, and all that change is. It's the passing of things.
It is the passing of all things, changes. It is the beginning of all.
It is a parade, this change is. It is a dance, this change is.
It is the river and the stepping that's never twice. It is the tragedy of all that was, and it is the fear of all that is. This change is.
It is the hope of what may be yet, this constant, this change, this ice to water, this day to eternity. Come to the river, step, step, step.
Our first hymn this morning is in your great hymnal. It's number 349. It's entitled We Gather Together. number 349 in the Great Hymnal. Please stand with your So for opening words, let's face it, change is challenging, often fearful for us whatever age we may be. Many of us shy away from change because of that feeling of groundlessness between the familiar and the new, like the trapeze artist in midair, midway between the bar he's holding onto and the one he's reaching for. We know that feeling. Or even like Linus, who, when his blanket is in the dryer, has nothing to hold on to. I found a songbook written by a little girl giving advice on how she faces change with big things like that first day of school that comes every single year, moving to a new neighborhood, and other significant changes for kids. She sings a really sweet song. It's short, and I won't even try to sing it, but I'll tell you the words, the lyrics. It says, I can hear change humming in its loudest, proudest song. I don't fear change coming, and so I sing along. I'm a chant that rises and rings. There is hope when my change sings. Acceptance and hope. She's only 7. I think she's got it. You think we would have learned how to handle change with ease and grace in our lives after so many years, so many changes. It's so personal in the way change touches us, in the way we respond to it. Perhaps depending on our ages, what we're losing, what we might be gaining. But in the end, it's there, the one constant. Pablo Neranda encourages us to embrace change because the alternative is to die slowly. These are his words. He who becomes the slave of habit, who follows the same route every day, makes the same choices, who never changes pace, who relies on the familiar, stays safe, who does not risk and try new ways of thinking and being in this world, who does not speak his truth and intimately experience his unique humanity. He dies slowly. He who does not take the risk of discomfort, of being out of step with others, who does not risk certainty for uncertainty, who does not find grace in himself or dreams to follow or create new ones. He dies slowly. Let us try to avoid death in small doses by reminding ourselves that being alive requires an effort far greater than the act of breathing. Let us not waste one moment of this one wild and precious life, as the poet tells us, and live in gratitude for this day of infinite possibilities. So may it be. And now we have acknowledgements of the heart. A time when we share the joys and concerns of our lives. It's a time to build community as we learn more about each other. I will light the first candle for all the survivors of COVID, that would be all of us, as well as those today who are struggling with illness, be it mental, physical, emotional. May they find love and peace. And now, if anyone would like to come up to share a joy or concern, I will light the candle for you. I think in 20 years, this is the first time I've used it. So, this one will be for all the unspoken joys and sorrows that are in your heart this morning. There it flames. Let's have a moment of silence as we get in touch with those feelings that have been expressed or not expressed this morning. Blessed be. And now is the time for the offering, which we've begun to have again post-COVID. I will be passing the baskets. This is an offering to support and sustain this place, which is special to so many of us, a place of memory and of hope, for we are now the keepers of the dream.
I'm going to play a song from Nicaragua now. In Spanish it's called Flor de Pino. In English it could be Pine Needle. And it's a song that about somebody who's going to work. And he's asking his community to remember him because he wants to come back. Esta flor de pino que corté para ti, del lado este joven vecino de Tilali, tiene la fragancia de una indita de acá, flor de jararaca que jamás morirá. Al pasar por Zacatí, te preguntarán por mí, les dirás que me fui lejos, pero un día volveré, porque no me hallo sin ti. Esta flor de pino que entre brumas nació, es la que Sandino con su mano cortó, para la muchachita que escogió para él, la telegrafista Flor de San Rafael. Al pasar por Zacatí, te preguntarán por mí, les dirás que me fui lejos, pero un día volveré, porque no me hallo sin ti.
The past months, years really, have been filled with political turmoil. Somehow we've survived them. We've survived a recent election and one that's already looming on the horizon. At this time, I'd like to read two special pieces that I found on democracy that's still in jeopardy, that's oh so fragile. And then I'll invite you into a time of reflection. The first one is by Parker Palmer. Some of you may know him. He's the Quaker author, educator, activist, and it's called Post-Election Day. And he says, if American democracy fails, the ultimate cause will not be a foreign invasion or the power of big money or the greed and dishonesty of some elected officials or a military coup or the internal communist, socialist, fascist takeover that some of us Americans are kept awake at night by thinking about. It will happen because we, you and I, became so fearful of each other, of our differences, and of our future, that we unraveled the civic community on which democracy depends, losing our power to resist all that threatens it and call it back to its highest form. And the second, this is a reading. It was written back in 2016. You remember that election. At the time, and it was written by two American men of the Sikh religion, Sikhism. I have been told that you pronounce that Sikh, so whether it's Sikh or Sikh, somehow it flows better if I say Sikh, so please stay with me. Sikhism is the world's 5th largest religion with 25 million adherents worldwide. The name of these two American Sikhs who wrote it are Kakashla and Kifata, and it's called A Sikh Prayer for America. In our tears and agony, we hold our children close and confront the truth. Our days and future at times appear dark, but my faith dares me to ask, what if this darkness is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? What if our America is not dead, but a country still waiting to be born? What if the story of America is one long labor? What if all the mothers who came before us, who survived genocide and occupation, slavery and Jim Crow, racism and xenophobia and Islamophobia, political oppression and sexual assault, what if they're standing behind us now whispering in our ears, you are brave? What if this is our great contraction before we birth a new future? Remember the wisdom of the midwife. Breathe, she says, and then push. Now is the time to breathe. But soon it will be time to push. Soon it will be time to take up the fight for those we love. Muslim fathers, Sikh sons, trans daughters, Indigenous brother, immigrant sister, white worker, the poor and forgotten, and the ones who cast their vote out of resentment and fear. Cast their vote out of resentment and fear. Let us make an oath to ongoingly fight for the soul of America, this land that never has been yet, and yet must be. Let us fight with revolutionary love and relentless optimism. And so I pray this Sikh prayer. Nanak Nam Shardi Karla, Tera Bain Sarbat Davala. In the name of the divine within us and around us, we find everlasting optimism. Within your will, may there be grace for all humanity. Blessed be. Let us take a moment to reflect on these two pieces. Amen. We will now have a unison reading. It's in the back of your gray hymnal, way in the back. It's number 489. 489, when love is felt or fear is known. 489, your gray hymnal. And we can read this together. When love is felt or fear is known, when holidays and holy days and such times come, when anniversaries arrive by calendar or consciousness, when seasons come as seasons do, old and new, but somehow new, when lives are born or people die, when something sacred sensed in soil or sky, mark the time, respond with thought or prayer or smile or grief. Let nothing slip between the fingers of the mind. For all of these are holy things we will not, cannot find again. And now we will sing the second song this morning. It's in the same gray hymnal. It's 346. This will lighten our spirits. Come sing a song with me. Please stand as you are able. 346.
Thanks. Annie, first, it's always such a pleasure to be here. Such a wonderful group of people. One of my favorite groups of people. It's really nice. But I have to say, I hope you don't take Annie too much for granted. This woman always inspires me with the things that she finds and shares. And Seek Prayer in particular, just glorious. And so I'm stuck with following in behind you, so I hope this goes okay. So I was told the topic for the theme for the month is change, so I went online and did some research. I was a little perplexed because all of us know there's a million books out there on managing change. There's all kinds of seminars and webinars. There's all kinds of management training that goes on for people how to manage change. And I was thinking, there's so much time spent on how to manage change and how to do it effectively and adapt to it and everything. And I realized that for me, change is there's a bigger appeal. there's a more essential part of changing, and it's me changing my mind. But I wanted to start off by, I went online and I found about 14 quotes here that I just want to read through fairly quickly. You can pick the one that you like later, and we'll vote on which ones will. But they all capture this part of the essence of change. Jeffrey Gitomer writes, "Change is not a four-letter word, but our reaction is often." Thomas Friedman writes, "Pessimists are usually right and optimists are usually wrong, but all the great changes have been accomplished by optimists." George Lichtenberg writes, "I cannot say whether things will get better if we change. What I can say is that they must change if we are to get better." Yeah, we can go home. Andy Warhol writes, "When people are ready to change, they change. They never do it before then, and sometimes they die before they get around to it. You can't make them change if they don't want to. Just like when they do want to, you can't stop them." Eddie Green writes, "Bending beats breaking." Helen Keller writes, "A bend in the road is not the end of the road unless you fail to make the turn." Alan Watts writes, "The only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and enjoy the dance." Robin Sharma writes, "Change is hardest at the beginning, messiest in the middle, and best at the end." Buckminster Fuller writes, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." Mother Teresa wrote, I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the waters and create ripples." Seth Godin writes, "Change almost never fails because it's too early. It almost always fails because it's too late." Albert Einstein writes, "I must be willing to give up what I am in order to become what I will be." Rumi writes, "Yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today, so I am wise, so I am changing myself." And George Bernard Shaw writes, "Those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything." So I was thinking about change, and I recognized that in my own experience of change and the frustration and anger and the success has often been about my own personal journey, adventure of changing my mind in terms of the context in which I see things, and the response that I have, and my sort of gut reaction to the reality when I actually face the reality instead of clinging or trying to cling to my expectations of what the reality should be or I would want it to be, which reminds me of the teachings of the Buddha. And so I just want to review momentarily. I know I've given the talk about Buddha here. And the point that the Buddha says that what's often defined as suffering in the world, which really that's not the correct translation of the word dukkha, the suffering is really disappointment and dissatisfaction and disaffection. And that's what causes us pain, is when we have expectations about what the reality should be like. The life we should live, the jobs we should have, the people we should be in relationship with, the places we live, the college football teams that should have won but didn't. Those expectations, and it's when we're let down with those that we feel disappointment and disaffection and mental dissatisfaction. And so the point is that what we need to do is to let go of those expectations and the power of those expectations over us. And so he talks about non-attachment. And be very clear again, that's not detachment. It doesn't mean that we escape or leave the world, but that we recognize that we need to be not attached to our expectations of the way things ought to be. And so it's a matter of, sometimes with psychologists, therapists often talk about acceptance and release, where we accept the reality and we let go of the power of our disappointment. And that way we can find some peace of mind. So this whole notion of change then, so when I'm faced with something that I don't like, or something that needs to be different, one of the first steps to my way of thinking is to assess my mental status and my mental attitude towards what's going on, and realize that maybe I'm stuck in my own expectations and my own experience of what life should be like. And maybe if I change my way of thinking, my mental context, then change won't be so difficult to either manage or accept or to celebrate and move joyfully into. Dance with it, as the poet said. So one of the biggest things that ever happened to me in my life, of course, as most of you know, is an inadvertent trip to South Africa. I had never planned on going, but I managed to go with a seminar back in 2002 when I was in seminary to study the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And reading Desmond Tutu's book, No Future Without Forgiveness. And many of you may also recall forgiveness is not one of my favorite words. It's too loaded. But his point that he makes in there about truth and reconciliation, whether it's about violence, which was certainly the case in apartheid South Africa, or it's just plain the life that we live, and recognizing that there is truth and there is misunderstanding, and that sometimes the greatest freeing, liberating thing that we can do is to tell the truth. First, we have to see it, recognize it, but then if we do share it, then it can lead to some kind of a reconciliation and moving forward. And he spends a lot of time in that book talking about restorative justice as opposed to punitive justice, which was the whole point of Truth and Reconciliation, in that rather than the new government coming in with a vendetta, instead being focused on resurrecting and recreating relationship, healthy relationship. And he talks about the word Ubuntu, which I know has been in popular usage, which actually means our humanity, which means that we reach out and recognize our humanity in other people and in our relationship with other people. And that's the way that we become human, and that's the way that we become more fully citizens of the world, by sharing in our humanity and nurturing a whole relationship rather than focusing on our disappointments and some of those pieces of that disappointment that lead to our suffering, our dissatisfaction, and our disappointment. So I have two anecdotes to tell. I want you to think about this. Think about your own experience of where you've been faced with some kind of change, which was either positive or negative or neutral, anyways in between, and how changing your mind may or may not have worked for you or might work in the future for you. And so I have two anecdotes to sort of tell. The first one actually happened on my second trip to South Africa. I was sitting in a B&B, having a couple of glasses of wine after dinner, in this little parlor place and by a fire. And there was a gentleman sitting there as well. And somehow we started a conversation, and he is, or was, or is, a Boer farmer. And so we were chatting about what life was like in post-apartheid South Africa. And so I had asked him, I said, how things had changed for him. This was a white gentleman. And and I said about how things are changed under the new administration. And this would have been in 2002. It would have been 8 years after their first truly democratic elections. So that's a very young country struggling to create a new identity. And he said, well, it was really difficult at first. He said, we didn't know, speaking for the Boers, he really didn't know what was going to happen. And they were terrified, of course, of what the consequences might be, but he was optimistic. But he said the first few years were really tough. He owns a large farm, like a plantation, and he was saying that he lost so many livestock and so much of his crop was just stolen all continually. And because the security, the South Africa security forces didn't exist anymore, there was a lot of crime going on, and it was tough. He thought he was going to lose his livelihood. So he went out and he invested a lot of money to put a big fence around his whole property. And he figured that would solve the problem. But then he discovered that every night there was whole sections of it were cut away, and he was still losing livestock and he was still losing crop. So he invested in a private security system to patrol. And he said, well, this will fix it. And he mended the fences. And then he discovered that, of course, people still managed to find ways to come around when the security forces weren't there. And he was still losing stock, and he was still losing some of his crop. And he was really getting really concerned and really didn't know what the future was going to hold. And then he happened to notice that along one side of his property, he was losing a lot less crops and livestock than on the other side of his property. And so he's thinking, why is this? And he noticed that along this side, there were a number of informal settlements, which are the tin shacks. And there were a number of people living along this side of his property. And there was far fewer loss, to his economy. And he thought about that for a long time, and then he went to the local Induna, the chief of the indigenous people, and he said, I'm wondering if I build a couple of cinder block houses around my property, can we get maybe some people to move in and live there? And he's like, well, how much are you going to charge? And he said, no, it's free housing. They just come in and then, they can have a little plot. So he did this, and he discovered that he still lost some stock and he still lost some crops, but far less by taking down the fence and allowing the people that lived around him to participate in what he was doing. And he said it changed his mind and his relationship with his neighbors forever. How many of us are willing to take down those fences and explore something totally new? More recently, 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, we were in South Africa, and we went to our favorite game reserve. How many of you have been to South Africa? How many have been to a game reserve? Give me a, yeah. Awesome experience. Mbiti is in the middle of the province KwaZulu-Natal. It's a private game reserve. And it was built by a Boer farmer back in the 90s. Originally, he decided that he wanted to convert from farming to a game reserve. And so he put fences all around the land, and he went out and bought wild animals. And that's the way you stock a game reserve. They're just not out there, and you just find them and put them there. He did quite well, and a lot of tourists come. It's a glorious place. It now has 5 concession lodges that you can stay there. But it's just a beautiful place. But many of you may also know that South Africa is going through a current situation where many of the indigenous peoples are suing for land, and they're targeting certain areas, farms and different places to be returned to the people. That the land was illegally taken under apartheid. It was redistributed. And they're looking for redistribution of the property, and so there are a lot of properties are really high risk, and so it's creating here again a real conflict between the haves and the have-nots. And what do you do with that? Because I mean, some people they've been on their property for hundreds of years, but the land was stolen to begin with, and so it becomes a really difficult moral, ethical, as well as a legal problem. And so how do you resolve that? So this, in Beatty Park, they saw this coming. I don't know the size of it right now, but it's big. And so rather than go to court, rather than to struggle, the administration went to the Induna, to the chief and to the council, and said, we would like to resolve this. We know that there are arguments to be made on all sides, but for the good of everybody, how about if we build housing? One of the big issues in South Africa is housing. Build housing, and we hire people from the local population, and become a neighbor employer. And they talked about it a lot, and they said they agreed to it. And the game reserve is doing so well that they just purchased property adjacent and are fencing it and taking down the fences so that they're going to double their size, because this program of working with the people rather than against the people to create jobs and economic welfare for everybody, again, is, I think, a wonderful model of Ubuntu, about working with people and having a restorative relationship rather than trying to fight about who's right and who's wrong and what my rights are as opposed to what your rights are, but instead trying to experience a way for all of us to live together. So that's what I had to say about this. And so I would like to hear some of your thoughts about this notion of changing your mind. And by that, let me just say, I'm not saying give up. I'm not saying detachment once again. I'm saying we're changing my mind. Not that I decide not to struggle for the beliefs that I have and what I might want to be committed to, but to realize that there's perhaps a different way to do it, and to think outside the box and to be more creative about trying to find solutions that are more inclusive.
I'm Kathy Lee, and I'm new here. Okay. And yesterday, I had the privilege of attending the Lynching Memorial Project Conference in Baltimore. And Greg, you talked about truth and change. And those of you who are aware, the Duttons aren't here today, but they're very much involved with the James Taylor Justice Coalition connected with Sumner Hall. And it was just very moving to me to listen to people whose families had family members disappear because they were lynched. And so I know that my involvement in this project, which started a couple of years ago back in Spokane, don't ask why, but there you go, has changed me because people want the truth to be told. And yesterday was just a very, very moving experience, and they showed part of the documentary that has been made about the trip that Menares Alliance and Sumner Hall sponsored for people to go down to Montgomery and see the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which memorializes the lynchings that have occurred in this country. Also, we heard yesterday from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of the state of Maryland. Maryland is the only state that has such a commission. And it was very moving to hear about how this commission is holding hearings in different parts of Maryland and trying to figure out how do we, residents of Maryland, memorialize these lynchings, as hard as it is to remember that. So truth and change very much intertwined.
Well, and I'll just add it again, once again, to emphasize that telling the truth in no way means to diminish or accept, excuse, but certainly to accept the reality of it and be committed to the idea of moving forward rather than being stuck in it. When therapists talk about acceptance and release, it's when you let go of the power of some part of history to continue to have an influence over your life so that you can move forward into something new, which is the second part of reconciliation. Is that true? Is it possible?
You talked earlier about expectations, and it's been my experience that unrealistic expectations is probably responsible for the demise of many first marriages. and second marriages are much more successful if you relinquish some of those expectations. On another personal note, for much of my life, I kind of thought of myself as being very independent and not in need of support from other people. And in 2016, I sort of felt that that was not the case anymore. And as a result, I signed the book and joined the UUCR in 2017. And it was almost impulsive. It wasn't really that conscious kind of change. It just felt like something I had to do. And I'm glad I did it.
Well, and thank you for the comment about the marriage thing, because this doesn't have to be just about politics, and it doesn't have to be, but changing our minds about our relationships with our significant others, with our kids, with our neighbors. If something's not working, to recognize that it's working, and if we have to leave it, we can leave it, that's fine. But otherwise, we might be able to change the way we think about it and our expectations, and then be able to resolve it. So it's not just about the ugly stuff, it's about individuals.
Thank you for that very powerful speech. As you were talking about dukkha. Dukkha. Dukkha really, as you said, is not suffering. It's actually more like experience of some kind of misery and pain. That's what dukkha is. And one of the teachings of Buddha was many of the teachings, how to overcome. And one of the things he always said was detachment. But we're always attached. We're all attached to many, many things. So our challenge is to unattach. Unattach is very difficult to do. We have millions of things attached to me, and how can I unattach all of those million things? That's the challenge, and that's the big change that we experience, which is fearful. So thank you for such powerful presentation.
But it's liberating when we can accomplish non-attachment.
Well, I don't think about change in big things like, today I think one thing and tomorrow I think another. But the older I get, the more aware I am that I am constantly being changed. I'm being tweaked this way and that. I will be different walking out of here than I was walking in here. But the more important thing is the realization that every time I interact with somebody, I'm affecting them and they are affecting me. It might be little, it might be big. We all have somebody, a teacher or somebody that had a big impact on us. Well, sometimes they're just little impacts, but it's my responsibility, and I really try to do this, is when I'm interacting with somebody, not thinking about how they're making me feel. Think about how I'm making them feel, because I am having an impact. We impact each other. And just, ignoring people or blah, 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 ignoring somebody is having an effect on them. How do we feel when somebody ignores us? It's an impact, it's an impact. So that's what I think about change. I'm like a leaf going down the river, I'm being tweaked this way, I'm floating this way, I'm floating this way. I'm also bumping up against things as I go. I'm bumping up against other leaves. I'm affecting them too.
Thanks. You remind me, for years in my office, I had a quote from May Sarton. It said, "We convert, if we ever do, not by demanding the impossible, but by being irresistible." And that's what you're talking about, is sometimes when we engage with people, we can think more about the way we're coming across in the model of behavior that we are modeling, rather than trying to convince them rationally or something like that. Which also gets to one of the more powerful sermons that I ever did, was trying to get people, and I think I did it here too, trying to get people not to quietly accept behavior and statements that we find so unacceptable. And I recognize that if I'm having a conversation with someone, I may never be able to change your mind, but the way I have that conversation can have a powerful impact on everybody that's watching the encounter. And if we don't enter into it at all because we're intimidated, we cannot change those people. So a lot of times when I was tempted to ignore a situation and walk away from it, I understood that it wasn't about that, it was about this. And we can't let those things go. So thank you for that. Harry!
Thank you for the two of you, Nadine and JP, putting a little bit more meaning into the tenets of Buddhism. And it opened up my mind. But one of the things we want to talk about change, we need to make sure that change is not good in itself. It's what changes did we choose to make? What's the proper changes? I think that UU Church helps us with this, to set our goals. And some changes are forced upon you that you don't choose. So then how we do that? That's change also. Let's try and make it positive.
And not all change is good just because it's change. Right. You're right. Absolutely. So profound. Anything else? Who's going to get the last word? Annie, you get the last word.
Oh, good.
You should.
I just loved it when he said about taking down the fences, how hard that is. Mm-hmm. And yet that's something that we have fences. I have a million of them, and maybe you do too, but to take them down, know when it's time to, and being able to do that is so important. Thank you, Greg. Thank you always for what you bring to us. Our closing words, you might think that my friend Nadine, who's here this morning, wrote these, but somebody else wrote them. It's called "The Purpose of This Community is to Change." If you are who you were And if the person next to you is who he or she was, if none of us has changed in the past hour since we came in here, then we failed. The purpose of this community, of any church, any temple, zendo, mosque, is to help its people grow. We do this through encounters with the unknown in ourselves, in one another, in the other, whoever that might be for us, however hard that might be, because these encounters have gifts to offer. And so, may we go forth this morning, not who you were, but who you could be. And so may we all. And now we'll extinguish the flame. The words are in your order of service. Extinguish this flame, not the light of truth, or warmth of community, or the power of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again.
Gracias a la vida in Spanish, so it's thanks for life, and basically it's talking or saying thanks to life that has given me so much.
Thank you, Reverend Greg. Thank you, Michael. And now let us gather up the goodness of this hour together that we have spent taking in the goodness for ourselves and also sending it out into the world for someone who may be on your heart and mind today, and for all beings everywhere, that we may feel the blessings from the changes in our life. Have a wonderful week. Please join us for fellowship.